Plenary session shall begin shortly. Please proceed the meeting hall, be seated, and switch your mobile phones to silent mode. Thank you. Xin trân trọng kính mời các vị đại biểu nhanh chóng vào hội trường và ổn định chỗ ngồi để phiên họp toàn thể thứ 3 được bắt đầu. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn. Distinguished delegates, the third plenary session shall begin shortly. Please proceed to the grand ballroom, be seated, and switch your mobile phones to silent mode. Thank you. Từ đã. Bây giờ em nhắc lại nhé. Xin trân trọng kính mời các vị đại biểu nhanh chóng vào hội trường, ổn định chỗ ngồi và chuyển điện thoại sang chế độ im lặng để phiên toàn thể thứ 3 được bắt đầu. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn. Distinguished delegates, the third plenary session shall begin shortly. Please proceed to the grand ballroom. Be kindly seated and switch your mobile phones to silent mode. Thank you for your kind cooperation. Kính thưa quý vị đại biểu, sau đây, phiên họp toàn thể thứ 3 chính thức được bắt đầu. Xin trân trọng kính mời bà Nguyễn Phương Nga, Chủ tịch Hội Liên hiệp các tổ chức hữu nghị Việt Nam, nguyên đại sứ, trưởng phái đoàn Việt Nam tại Liên Hợp Quốc, lên bàn chủ tọa để điều hành phiên họp. Xin kính mời ông Konstantin Vyunkov, đại sứ Nga tại Việt Nam, và bà Sa Minh Ngọc, Trung úy, nữ sĩ quan gìn giữ hòa bình của Việt Nam tại Nam Sudan, lên sân khấu để tham dự phiên họp. Distinguished delegates, the third plenary session now begins. May I kindly invite on the stage Her Excellency Nguyễn Phương Nga, Chairwoman of the Vietnam Union of Friendship Organizations, former ambassador and permanent representative of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam to the United Nations, for moderating the session. For the panelists, please welcome on the stage His Excellency Konstantin Vyunkov, Ambassador of the Russian Federation to Vietnam, and First Lieutenant Sa Minh Ngọc, female peacekeeper in the United Nations mission in South Sudan. Thank you.
So, shall we begin? Yes? Everybody on already? Okay, thank you. So, good evening from Hanoi, and welcome to the third. As you may be well aware, the landmark resolution 1325 in 2000 called for an expansion in the role and contribution of women in United Nations peacekeeping operations. Women participation in UN peacekeeping missions span across police, military, and civilian levels, and they are playing a greater role and making greater contribution in UN peacekeeping operations. In 1993, women made up only 1% of deployed uniformed personnel. More than 20 years have passed, yet currently, only around 6.6% of all uniformed personnel in field missions are women. This is certainly a very modest figure. In this session, we will have the opportunity to listen to a panel of a very distinguished speakers from the UN system, member states, academies, and especially female peacekeepers themselves, who have served or are serving on the ground in UN peacekeeping missions. We have 3 keynote speakers and 6 panelists joining our panel via teleconference. We have here 2 panelists joining me from Hanoi. We have the Excellency Mr. Konstantin Vasilievich Vnukov, Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary Ambassador of the Russian Federation to Vietnam. And then we have the panelists, First Lieutenant Sa Minh Ngọc, former peacekeeper in the UN mission in South Sudan. And we will hear from our 3 keynotes and very distinguished speakers. United Nations Under-Secretary General, His Excellency Jean-Pierre Lacroix, Deputy Minister for External Affairs of India, His Excellency Mr. Vikas Warath, and the Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security for Canada, Her Excellency Mrs. Jacqueline O'Neill. And we have 6 panelists joining us from abroad via the teleconference. Mr. Clark Cooper, Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, State Department, USA. From the UN, we have Major General Colonel Fatima Denison from Ghana, Deputy Director of Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. And then we have Ms. Asako Okai, Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Crisis Bureau, UNDP from New York. We have Major General Christine Lund, first ever female force commander of the UN Peacekeeping, and a retired Major General in the Norwegian Army. And we have Professor Robert Ignell, Vice Chancellor of the Swedish Defense University, former Senior Fellow at Georgetown University, Institute of Women, Peace and Security. First, we will listen to our three keynotes and very distinguished speakers. So each keynote speaker will have around 8 to 10 minutes to speak, and then we'll proceed to a panel discussion of 8 panelists, where each panelist will have 5 to 7 minutes for their interventions. Since we have large number of speakers, and it's already late evening here in Hanoi, I would really appreciate if the speakers could stick to the time allocated to each intervention. If time allows, I will open floor for comments and questions. So with that, I have the great honor to invite the first keynote speaker of our plenary to kickstart the conversation, the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping, Mr. Jean-Pierre Lacroix. Mr. Lacroix has over 25 years of political and diplomatic experience focusing on multilateral organizations and on UN activities and programs. His previous appointments include Ambassador of France to Sweden, Chief of Protocol of France, Deputy Permanent Representative of France to the UN, and advisor at the Cabinet of the French Prime Minister. The floor is yours. Please, Mr. Jean-Pierre Lacroix.
Thank you very much, Excellency, Moderator, and ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and I would like to begin by thanking the government of Vietnam for their efforts in organizing this important event, and also to congratulate the Vietnam for its efforts to promote the Women, Peace and Security agenda. I would like to make 4 points, and I will begin with the first one, which is that the WPS agenda is a key priority for UN peacekeeping. Women, peace and security has been and will continue to be at the core of our priorities for peacekeeping, and certainly for my department. The Secretary General's Action for Peacekeeping Initiative, or A4P as we call it, which is really our framework agenda, focuses on women, peace and security as a key priority for effective peacekeeping and sustaining peace. Our shared commitments made as part of Action for Peacekeeping are threefold. We commit, 1, to increase women participation in peace and political processes. 2, we need to systematically integrate a gender perspective into all stages of analysis, planning, implementing, and reporting. And 3, we commit to increasing the number of civilian and uniformed women in peacekeeping at all levels, including in key positions. These goals are supported by all of us and at all levels at the UN, and certainly by our Secretary General, who at the roundtable organizing by the Department of Peace Operation in October to celebrate the anniversary of Resolution 1325, launched a rallying call to, and I quote, take bold actions, end of quote, to fully implement the Women, Peace and Security agenda. At the same time, we know that we can equally count on all those member states who champion this agenda, and many of them are virtually or physically present here today. In particular, I would again like to commend Vietnam our host for the emphasis it puts on the need to address the underlying root causes and barriers towards the implementation of the WPS agenda in peacekeeping, and for its call to all partners to fulfill the commitment to allocate resources to conflict-affected countries with a view to advancing gender equality. We all need to continue our efforts to achieve this goal, as underlined in Security Council Resolution 2538, which was adopted earlier this year, and which was the first ever UN Security Council resolution dedicated specifically to the topic of women in peacekeeping. My second point will be, why do we need more women in peacekeeping? Why do we need to increase the participation of women in peacekeeping? I think, simply put, it is not only the right thing to do, it is also the smart thing to do. And let me give you a few examples to illustrate that. First, greater participation of women helps us to ensure that peacekeeping operations are representative of the communities we serve, which allows for better engagement with the communities we protect. Second, greater participation of women also brings greater diversity in perspectives, backgrounds, and skill sets, which better equip peacekeeping operations to deliver on their mandates. And third, as we've seen in past instances where women were deployed, women peacekeepers can serve as role models to women in host countries and encourage them to join a career in the security sector in the service of security and peace as a public good. My third point will be what we're doing to increase the number of women in peacekeeping. And here, since the launch of the Secretary General's Uniform Gender Parity Strategy, the Department of Peace Operations has worked with troop and police, also in justice and corrections contributing countries, to increase women's representation in uniformed components at headquarters and in the field. Some of the key initiatives we have taken to achieve progress are increasing our engagement with contributing countries to encourage the nomination of women, increasing training and professional development opportunities for women to meet qualification prerequisites for UN deployments, and maintaining all women leadership rosters and launching women-only calls for certain positions. In addition to this, we're working with our colleagues in the UN Department of Operational Support to improve the physical environment, such as camp layouts and accommodation, to help women's participation and retention in field missions as part of a project funded by the Elsi Initiative. We are also gathering information through exit interviews and surveys on the barriers uniformed women are still facing in the field to serve as a basis to determine further actions. My fourth point will be about the progress that we have already achieved. We are pleased to say that these efforts have had practical results. We have made or surpassed most 2020 targets set out in the Uniform Gender Parity Strategy. For the police, we currently stand at 30% individual police officers and 12.4% for formed police units, FPUs. That is to say 30% of women and 12% of women. For the military, we stand at 18.5 women in the staff officers and military observers category. We are, however, yet to achieve our targets for women in military contingents, a target that has been traditionally more difficult to obtain due to the relatively small number of women normally serving in contingents. And we collectively need to pay specific attention to our efforts in this area. And this is certainly an area where we expect our troop and police contributing countries, particularly our troop contributing countries, to continue their efforts. We are proud to have achieved historical progress in the representation of women in uniform leadership positions, with 3 women force or deputy force commanders and 4 women leading police components. And of course, it's a pleasure to be here today, albeit virtually, with our good friend, Major General Cheryl Pease, the force commander of UNFICIT. We can also report significant progress in closing the gender gap in civilian senior mission leadership positions. Currently, 45% of the heads and deputy heads of missions serving across all peace operations are women, representing the highest representation ever achieved. While there has been promising progress, I think it's fair to say that much remains to be done. We rely on our troop and police contributing countries and countries providing justice and corrections personnel to ensure that information is provided to women officers about deployment opportunities, to increase the number of nominations of women, to provide the requisite training to women personnel and facilitate their participation in specialty courses, to put forward women candidates for UN leadership and military, police and justice and corrections specific courses, to identify and address institutional and unconscious biases that affect recruitment, retention, deployment, and promotion of women officers. And finally, we also rely on our troop and police contributing countries, as well as our justice and correction personnel contributing countries, to create long-term strategies to increase women participation in national military and justice and correction and police services. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this is what I wanted to tell you as an introduction to your very important panel. Thank you for your support on this vital agenda, and we look forward to continuing our work with all of you towards increasing the full and meaningful participation of women in peacekeeping operations, a precondition that is absolutely indispensable for the success of this operation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jean-Pierre Lacroix, for your very insightful briefing on the approach of the UN and the strategies of the UN with the view to increase the participations of women in peacekeeping and the implementations of the Women and Peace and Security agenda. Thank you very much, sir. Our next keynote speaker is a representative from the government of India, one of the UN's top troops contributing country, and has a long tradition of PKO's participations. Joining us today via teleconference is Deputy Minister for External Affairs of India, Mr. Vikas Swarup. Deputy Minister Swarup has a 30 years career in diplomacy and has served in diplomatic assignment in Ankara, Washington, D.C., Addis Ababa, London. He used to serve as High Commissioner of India to Canada, among others. Following being Joint Secretary for the UN, he was official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs and head of the Public Diplomacy Division. He served in numerous advisory roles to the government and published numerous books. Excellencies, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Excellency, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me take this opportunity to convey the deep gratitude of the Indian delegation to the Socialist Republic of Vietnam for inviting me to deliver the keynote address on this very important topic. India has a long and distinguished history of service in UN peacekeeping, having contributed more personnel than any other country. To date, more than 250,000 Indians have served in 50 of the 71 UN peacekeeping missions established around the world since 1948. Currently, there are about 5,500 Indian troops and police personnel who have been deployed to UN peacekeeping missions. A total of 171 Indian peacekeepers, more than any other country, have paid the ultimate price while serving with the United Nations. Excellencies, 2020 marks the 20th anniversary of the adoption of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, a groundbreaking resolution that recognized women's leadership to achieve international peace and security and their contributions to conflict prevention, peacekeeping, conflict resolution, and peace building. As we all know from experience, women suffer the most in any conflict situation. Obviously, more women in peacekeeping means more effective peacekeeping. Women peacekeepers have greater access to communities, help in protection of the most vulnerable, and inspire other women to play a meaningful part in peace and political processes. Research reports have pointed out that peace agreements are 35% more likely to last at least 15 years when women are at the table. Women peacekeepers are essential enablers to build trust and confidence with local communities and help improve access and support for local women. Women are also suited better to address the disproportionately negative effect that conflict has on the livelihood of women and bring new perspectives and solutions to the table by effectively addressing the needs of women and children in conflict and post-conflict settings. Excellencies, India's contribution to the strong and positive engagement of UN with the countries facing or recovering from prolonged conflicts through deployment of uniformed women contingent goes back to 1960, when women of the Indian Armed Forces Medical Services headed to ONUC, or the UN peacekeeping mission in the Republic of Congo, to assist with the setting up of a 400-bed hospital. In 2007, India created history by deploying the first ever all-female formed police unit for UN peacekeeping in Liberia. This unit served in Liberia for a decade and through their work managed criminality, deterred sexual and gender-based violence, and helped rebuild safety and confidence among the local population, and served as an example of how the deployment of more female uniformed personnel can help the UN in its efforts to combat sexual exploitation and abuse. The Indian FPU led to deep and long-lasting positive impacts on Liberian society. During the farewell of the Indian FPU, the then president of Liberia underlined the contribution of the force by saying, and I quote, "You have inspired Liberian women, imparted in them the spirit of professionalism, and encouraged them to join operations that protect the nation." You would be surprised to know that during the tenure of the Indian FPU, the number of women applying to join the Liberian National Police tripled from approximately 120 to 350 within 2 months of the arrival of the Indian FPU. The number of women enrolled at Police Academy shot up from 4 per class to 30 per class in 2007 and 100 per class in 2008 and 2009. And female representation in Liberian security services grew from 10% to 17%. Women peacekeepers obviously serve as powerful mentors and role models for women and girls in post-conflict settings in the host community, being examples for them to advocate their own rights and pursue non-traditional careers. Earlier this year, on the 29th of May, or the International Day of UN Peacekeepers, Secretary General Guterres lauded the achievements of Indian Army officer Major Suman Gavani, who was awarded the UN Military Gender Advocate of the Year for 2019 for her role as a peacekeeper with the UN mission in South Sudan, UNMISS. Major Gavani was the principal focal point of contact for gender issues for military observers in the mission. The officer encouraged participation in joint military patrols to maintain gender balance, irrespective of the hardships under extreme field conditions. Apart from supporting the UNMISS force initiatives, she also trained the South Sudan government forces on conflict-related sexual violence aspects. Excellencies, India has been an active participant in the deliberations on issues focusing on women empowerment and gender mainstreaming at various UN bodies. During the past 2 decades, the normative frameworks on women, peace and security have been strengthened considerably. Today, there is a greater awareness about the centrality of meaningful participation of women in UN's peace and security efforts, including peacekeeping. In the Declaration of Shared Commitments on UN Peacekeeping Operations under the Action for Peacekeeping, the A4P, member states agreed to collectively commit to implementing the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and its priorities by ensuring full, equal and meaningful participation of women in all stages of the peace process. They further recommitted to increasing the number of civilian and uniformed women in peacekeeping at all levels and in key positions. India welcomes the recently launched Uniform Gender Parity Strategy and sees it as a collective commitment towards the implementation of A4P. The Uniformed Gender Parity Strategy, which was adopted in 2018, has given clear targets to achieve enhanced participation of women personnel at various categories. India is committed to increasing the number of women peacekeepers and to meeting the targets in this regard within the specified timelines. In order to fulfill its commitments, India has already deployed a female engagement team at the Democratic Republic of Congo as part of the rapidly deployable battalion in MONUSCO. We have also pledged a women-formed police unit under the Peacekeeping Readiness Capability System. While we fully welcome the initiatives by the UN Secretariat in driving the formulation of policy frameworks to increase the number of women peacekeepers, we notice that to accommodate countries who cannot fulfill all women unit commitments, the policy frameworks have been diluted to prefer mixed units over full women units. I think this calls for an approach towards a review and greater introspection. It is our considered view that to achieve the enhanced targets under the Uniform Gender Parity Strategy, the UN ought to encourage countries that are willing or have already pledged to contribute all women units. Excellencies, nothing can damage the credibility of the UN than instances of sexual exploitation and abuse by its own employees. India fully supports UN Secretary General's zero tolerance approach to sexual exploitation and abuse. India was the first country to contribute to the Secretary General's Trust Fund for Victims of Sexual Exploitation and Abuse, and also signed the voluntary compact on SEA with the Secretary General in 2017. The Indian Prime Minister has joined the Circle of Leadership on the prevention of and response to sexual exploitation and abuse in the United Nations operations. India is also funding a project of the Department of Management Strategy, Policy and Compliance called Pipeline to Peacekeeping Command Program. This project is aimed to develop the capacity of future commanders and managers to lead by example and raise awareness of UN standards of conduct among their personnel. To conclude, India stands ready to engage with our partners to work towards ensuring the meaningful participation of women and mainstreaming of women, peace and security considerations for building inclusive, peaceful, and resilient societies. Just as a bird cannot fly on one wing, durable peace cannot be achieved without the active participation of women. That is what we must all aim for in moving from commitment to results. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Excellency, Mr. Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of India, for your very insightful briefings and sharing a lot of experiences of India. Thank you so much. Our last keynote speaker is joining us from Canada. Her Excellency, Mrs. Jacqueline O'Neill, Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security from the Foreign Ministry of Canada. Canada is a true contributing country that has an impressive figure of almost 1/3 of the peacekeepers being female. Ms. Jacqueline O'Neill is Canada's first ambassador for women, peace and security, appointed by the Prime Minister in June 2019. Her primary role is to advise ministers of foreign affairs, defense, and numerous other departments engaged in implementing Canada's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. The floor is yours, Ambassador O'Neill, please.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, and thank you, through you, to our wonderful and very hardworking Vietnamese hosts. Thank you for moderating us today and for your dedication to these issues throughout your own career. And greetings to my fellow speakers and panelists and to all the delegates gathered in person and watching us online, and in particular to all of the young people engaging today. We really need you in this conversation. And finally, special greetings to Canada's ambassador to Vietnam, Deborah Paul, and our colleagues at the embassy who are very committed to these issues and are joining us as well. So at sessions focused on women in peacekeeping or women in the security sector overall, there is often a common pattern that we seem to follow around the world. And that is that so many of us are tempted to start with the why, or the idea of making the case about the unique contributions of women to peacekeeping. And we can certainly do so. Mr. Lacroix and Mr. Swarup just did so brilliantly. And the case that we make is powerful and it deserves attention. And the pragmatist in me understands that we need to use all of the compelling reasons we can to create change. I think it is also crucial to reflect on how often we ask about the specific value that men bring to peacekeeping. Why do we need male peacekeepers? Because if we as member states, as troop and police contributing countries really support the universality of human rights and the importance of equal opportunities, we should also keep the burden on ourselves to justify why we still have barriers in place to half the population that wants to compete on a level playing field and being treated equally. And make sure that the burden of justification is not on women peacekeepers themselves to ensure that they justify how they did not only the jobs they were hired to do, but they also did additional and better and different work. And it was in part this focus on removing barriers that compelled Canada to create what we call the Elsi Initiative in 2017. I'm pleased to share a very brief update on that with us today. So the initiative was rooted in the very clear recognition that, as we've just heard, women are crucial to peacekeeping operations. And yet the numbers have been unacceptable. They've been unacceptably low. And importantly, the pace of change or of growth was also unacceptably slow. So Canada started what we called a 5-year pilot project named the Elsi Initiative. And I should note is named after a person, a woman named Elsi McGill, who was born in Vancouver, Canada in 1905. She had polio, and then she went on to become Canada's first woman to get her master's in aeronautical engineering, and she helped build planes. So in that spirit, we're working with international partners to identify and address barriers to women's participation as uniformed peacekeepers, and also to not just get the numbers up, but to make sure that women can serve and perform under necessary conditions. So how is it going overall? We have 5 parts to the initiative, and I'll give you a very brief update on each of them. The first part is what we call a barrier assessment methodology, and that is now publicly available. So with partners, we did research that looked at a wide range of countries and identified 14 categories of barriers to women joining security forces, being deployed, and having acceptable experiences on mission. And they ranged from things like inadequate accommodation or facilities or equipment, to women not being sent on some of the most dangerous patrols because they're women, to sexual and gender-based harassment. And several countries are now undergoing this assessment. I'm very proud to say that Canada is about to start our own assessment as well. And our Chief of Defense Staff says he's very eager to learn what is identified and to take action to address it. What having this barrier assessment means is that we'll have a much better understanding within countries of what the true issues are and how important each one is relative to another, not just depending on the opinions of a few people in a few roles that are tasked to think about this. The second part of the initiative is that we funded research in some key projects. So for example, we just released a study on the experiences of women peacekeepers who have been deployed to missions, which involved interviews of 142 military women from 53 countries. And it really brought to the fore some uncomfortable realities, including what women were talking about, the all too common refrain of what women should be and how they should appear in the eyes of others. And what we learned from this report is that it's really incumbent on leaders to commit to changing systems that allow harmful practices and biases to continue. And above all, and as we just heard, the importance of listening to the experiences of women peacekeepers directly. The third area was working directly with other countries. So Canada is working to share experiences and support with the Ghana Armed Forces and the Zambia Police Service. The fourth one is international advocacy. So raising awareness, sharing learning, and coordinating, including through a contact group, which is like a steering committee and now includes 13 countries. And last but not least, we worked to launch a fund with our UN partners called the Elsi Initiative Fund for Uniformed Women in Peace Operations. The idea of the fund is to support and incentivize countries who want to assess their own barriers and want to take action to remove them. So far we've raised $21 million, Canada being the largest contributor along with others. And there's been a very high demand for the first programming cycle. So the fund has received 36 letters of interest from about 18 troop and police contributing countries and 4 UN organizations. So we received an immense amount of demand totaling over the $21 million that we currently have in the fund. And we expect even more demand for the second cycle. The reason I left this item to the very end is because I want to leave you with a call to action, and that is to join Australia, Canada, Finland, Germany, the Netherlands, and Norway, and the United Kingdom in contributing to the fund, or to apply to the fund yourselves to implement many of the good ideas that you will hear in this session. As awareness increases about the importance of mixed teams in peacekeeping grows, and the knowledge of barriers in our own institution increases, and the size of the Elsi Initiative Fund expands, there will just be fewer and fewer reasons for not taking meaningful action. This is something that, as we've just discussed, is important to do for women, but also for the entire population and also for the future of UN peacekeeping and the UN's reputation and relevance overall. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you today. I'm looking forward to hearing everyone else's comments and our discussion. All the best.
Thank you so much, Ambassador O'Neill. We appreciate your sharings of Canada's experiences, Canada's initiatives, especially very scientific approach, ranging from identifying the barriers to raising awareness and secure the fund for the participations of women in peacekeeping operations. Thank you very much. So now we'll move on to the panel segment. Some of the questions that you may consider to address for this session include: what are the examples of initiatives and strategies to increase women's representations in uniform services, both within UN missions and national militaries? What can troop contributing countries, UN and regional organizations do or accelerate to increase the meaningful participation of women in peacekeeping? Examples of female peacekeepers who became a role model for other peacekeepers and or in community where they served. These questions will help guide the discussion, but are by no means exhaustive. We would love to hear your very wide-ranging and different perspectives on these very important topics. So our first panelist is from the United States government, Mr. Clark Cooper, who is Minister of State for Political Military Affairs, State Department. Mr. Cooper had over 2 decades of experience in both diplomatic and military roles and has served as UN alternate representative to the UN Security Council. His active duty military assignments includes tours with Joint Special Operation Command, US Africa Command, Special Operation Command Central, and other fulfilled military tours in Africa. So, Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours. Please, sir.
Well, good morning or good evening to all of those who are tuning in from around the world. It is a great pleasure for me to be here today discussing such an important issue. So I want to thank first to Vietnam, to the United Nations Women for co-sponsoring such an excellent event, and to Ambassador Nguyen Phuong Na for moderating this very timely discussion. Do please accept my deep appreciation for Deputy Minister Martha Morgan and Assistant Secretary Osaka Okaya as co-chairs of this event, as well as the keynote speakers that we just heard from today, Undersecretary General Lacroix, Assistant Minister Swarup, Ambassador O'Neill, and of course we will be hearing also from Professor Engel. It is a privilege to be speaking alongside such esteemed officials and scholars, all who are very much committed to the future of women in peacekeeping. And finally, I would like to also recognize Ambassador Kelly Curry, the United States Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, who will also be a keynote speaker tomorrow in session 4 for the discussion on where we should be in 10 to 12 years from now. So Secretary Pompeo and the Trump administration, we remain strong supporters of women, peace, and security, and the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which, as you know, is foundational for the resolution in the movement on WPS. The United States is deeply committed to the United Nations and regional peacekeeping as a critical tool for promoting international peace and stability and the protection of civilians. Women play an incredibly crucial and valuable part in peacekeeping missions around the globe, and perform similarly the peacemaking process, not just peacekeeping. Again, I reemphasize peacemaking process, which provide the ultimate success of those missions. Throughout history, conflicts disproportionately affected women and girls, yet women remain underrepresented in efforts to prevent and resolve conflict, and have not been included in post-conflict peace-building activities commensurate with their capabilities. The United States recognizes the diverse roles women play as agents of change at preventing and resolving conflict, countering terrorism, countering violent extremism, and building post-conflict peace and stability. Studies repeatedly demonstrate that the full and meaningful participation by women in peace operations, especially in leadership positions, widens perspectives on conflict management, opens doors for more inclusive political resolutions, and ultimately improves international peace-building strategies. There's also a direct correlation between the meaningful participation of women in peacekeeping and the performance of the effectiveness of peacekeeping units. We are collectively proud to celebrate the 20th anniversary this year of the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and the establishment of the WPS agenda in 2020, which recognizes that more women in peacekeeping equals more women empowered, and that more women and girls are free from violence, meaning that peace efforts are more durable and long-lasting for communities and states in need. Commitment to the WPS agenda by the United States drives us to be the leading financial contributor to peacekeeping, as well as the leading provider of capacity building to partner nations, those nations willing to take on the challenges of peace operations. Together, we support thousands of women today serving on the front lines of conflict resolution. And we are firmly committed to expanding opportunities for women around the world dedicated to the struggle for peace. The Trump administration is proud to work in this area to support the amazing role women play in peacekeeping efforts. In 2017, President Trump signed the Women, Peace, and Security Act and launched the United States Strategy on Women, Peace, and Security in 2019. With these two efforts, the administration underscored its firm support for the comprehensive integration of women into preventing conflict, conflict resolution, peace building, justice, and disaster recovery efforts worldwide. Through the WPS Act, the United States became the first government in the world with a comprehensive law requiring a government-wide strategy to promote the participation of women in overseas conflict, prevention, management, and resolution, as well as post-conflict relief and the recovery efforts. In addition, under the Global Peace Operations Initiative, GPOI, the world's largest peace operations capacity building program within the Department of State, in collaboration with our colleagues at the Department of Defense, just across the river over here, works with 55 partner countries around the world to enhance international capacity to effectively conduct United Nations and regional peace operations. Women peacekeepers in the conflict-affected regions served by UN peace operations have achieved significant success in stabilizing societies by enhancing the effectiveness of security services, peacekeeping efforts, institutions, and decision-making processes. Accordingly, furthering this trend by promoting the role of women and gender integration in peacekeeping is among our top GPOI objectives. Since 2007, more than 10,000 women participated in GPOI training events. GPOI helps remove barriers to women's participation in training by supporting gender-inclusive facility upgrades to partner countries' peacekeeping training centers. Upgrades often include the development of female barracks, latrines, and other necessary accommodations to ensure women can participate fully in peacekeeping training events. GPOI also facilitated the increased deployment of women peacekeepers. Since 2010, GPOI partner nations have demonstrated our shared commitment to women, peace, and security by increasing the number of deployed female military peacekeepers by 109%. I'll say that again, an increase of 109% as compared with non-GPOI nations who increased their numbers by 38%. Still an onward trajectory across the board. Notably, GPOI worked very closely with Undersecretary General Lacroix's team in the UN Department of Peace Operations to develop UN training materials focused on enhancing gender integration and women's active participation in peacekeeping. The United States is also working to ensure the UN headquarters, troop and police contributing countries, their leaders, and troop and police contributing contingents address failures to protect civilian populations and pursue accountability and disciplinary actions when peacekeepers sexually exploit or abuse the very populations they are deployed to protect. Peacekeeping contributors must reinforce their commitment to uphold a zero-tolerance policy for sexual exploitation and abuse. To support this accountability effort, in 2018, the United States began working with the United Nations to fund and coordinate the first joint US-UN National Investigation Officer course, or the NIO course. The course trains the officers to investigate conduct and discipline issues, including allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse against military personnel serving with a UN peacekeeping operation. Through GPOI, we continued our support of the NIO course with 7 iterations conducted through the end of 2019, including participants from 33 countries in Africa, Latin America, and in the Pacific region. Unfortunately, as we all know, COVID restrictions have adjusted and amended logistics for all of us. Those restrictions led to cancellation of scheduled 2020 courses, but we will resume the UN course support as soon as logistically feasible. So working closely with like-minded countries and the UN to develop and deliver training and drawing on the expertise of civil society organizations, GPOI is making tangible contributions toward international peace and security. GPOI continues to promote women, peace, and security as an important means of improving accountability and operational effectiveness in peacekeeping. The United States remains committed to continue smart investments in bringing more women into peacekeeping operations and doing our part to empower and support women to work to make the world a safer and more peaceful place. We look forward to continuing these women-focused programs, and I remain confident the United States will continue to play an instrumental role in uplifting women, peace, and security. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark Cooper, for very insightful remarks, which stress the role of women in peacekeeping as the agent of change, and also confirming the U.S. The strong commitment to women, peace, and security agenda. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you for being with us today. So our second panelist is Major General Sharon Peace, Force Commander of the UN Peacekeeping in Cyprus. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador.
Sorry, yes, I just would like to make some short introductions. Sorry, ma'am. An Australian National Major General Pierce has a long and decorated career. She has commanded the Defense Police Training Center and the 1st Military Police Battalion, and was appointed as a member of the Order of Australia for exceptional service. I'm very pleased to welcome the first female peacekeeper panelist of tonight to join our discussion. Major General Pierce, the floor is yours. Please, ma'am.
Madam Ambassador, thank you. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, it's a real pleasure to be with you this evening. And I'd like to thank the Government of Vietnam for hosting this important event. And also thank you to our speakers that have already echoed their comments. And I concur with everything that's been said thus far. What I'd like to just focus on this evening is a second discussion point, which is what can the troop contributing countries and the UN and regional organisations do to or accelerate the increasing meaningful participation of women in peacekeeping. I think it's about, my assessment is this relationship. It's a relationship between the United Nations, regional organisations and the troop contributing countries. The troop contributing countries have a real role in growing the capability. You cannot buy a peacekeeper. You have to grow them, recruit them, train them, develop them and retain them. And this is not a quick process. I am 35 years in the making, from a junior officer through to my current appointment as Force Commander. And I've had opportunities along the way, but I've also grown and developed and been a leader at each level for me to be able to have the qualities and the competencies to fulfill my full responsibilities. And for that, I think it's from the troop contributing nations, it's about creating the framework, and that is on a policy settings to ensure that we have the right policies to attract and retain females, and also legislative approaches in regarding to employment opportunities, what areas you can work in, and to open up as many employment opportunities as possible for female participation. It's also about the organisational framework. There are many countries where you have gates, as I will call them, where females will opt out or they don't meet the requirements by a certain time because they've chosen to have a family along the way. We have to have a look at those frameworks in which we operate to ensure that we're not creating any biases that will not enable our females to develop to become future leaders. And also I'd offer that it's a culture. Women will walk with their feet. They will not stay in an organisation where they are not felt valued or have a sense of purpose. So it's really important for the environment in which we operate that we have that sense of purpose and that our voice is respected and has meaning. So I say that is a longer term, slower growth path. But what we see is the initiatives and the strategies that the speakers have already articulated, and that is the linkages now with such as the Elsi Initiative and the initiatives that the United Nations is doing, and that's about how to accelerate that growth and how to pull those the female peacekeepers into peacekeeping missions. And that is really based on data and statistics and actually that really deep development of our female peacekeepers. You cannot get to senior leadership positions unless you've been in junior appointments, and really understanding the data, who's been trained, who's qualified, who's in our TCC, so that we can draw upon them to then fulfill some key appointments around our missions. And that takes a lot of effort to maintain those databases. And I would offer that if you reached in and invited particular females to nominate against appointments, you would see a big uptick in female participation, to know that they're wanted and feel valued in an organisation that is seeking them out. I'd also offer about training teams and the ability to either deliver mobile training teams. There are a lot of specific to women training that is occurring within the UN, but also there are a lot of regional initiatives that are occurring. And I know in the Indo-Pacific region, for me as an Australian, there are a lot of regional training activities that are going on the WPS agenda. I'd also look to see initiatives where we do some deep selection. offer up troop contributing countries to develop in 3 rotations a female junior leader. What I see is we have our junior leaders and we have some senior leaders. The middle level is not at unit command. I don't see many females being employed around UN peacekeeping missions in that middle management area. So how do we pull them up and how do we get them in? And those contracts with troop contributing nations on how we can pull those individuals into the missions. But also like to see some further initiatives, and this is about the relationships with between the troop contributing countries, the regional entities who are actively involved in the space, and the United Nations as a whole. And that's looking at incentives to individuals to be part of the peacekeeping, shorter deployments, financial support for family support, some additional training, and to share experiences of what's worked and what's not, and for leadership opportunities. And the last one I just want to go on, none of this will be achieved unless we have some strong leadership. And leadership is really the backbone to a lot of the success going forward. I say that on 2 fronts, is that this is key policy change and key policy settings that we need to establish. We have gone, most troop contributing countries have very low numbers of females, and this takes strong leadership over time and a continual commitment to pursue this increase in numbers. And for that, we have to have diversity in the leadership. We have to have a variety of background. We have to have gender. We have to have culture. We have to have that diversity of thought and to bring in a whole lot of different prisms by which we see the same issue to be able to develop ideas and initiatives going forward. And we have to create that inclusive and diverse work environment, and that's part about retention. We won't get the same women coming back again to fill senior appointments if they didn't have a positive experience the first time or the second time. So it's about how do we create that environment so they can thrive and so their voice does have that meaning. And I'll take it to the last point for myself. It's about the advocacy by our male leadership. It's a he for she. I'm a converted audience, as most of the females in the audience are. We know what we can bring to the table. We know that our diversity of thought value adds and that we have a collaborative style and our approach is welcomed. But it's a he for she, the advocacy of our males, that drives it forward. And I've seen some of my force commander colleagues in other missions really see the benefit of having women within their peacekeeping missions and are huge advocates. What we need to do is to have not only our chiefs of defence staff and forces around the troop contributing countries being that advocacy for increased female participation, but under those individuals, the key leaderships across each of the nations to be involved in the training, the recruitment, the retention, to be focused continually on that increased base numbers so the UN can then draw from it. And it really is, and that again is having the male advocacy focusing on policy, the culture, the organisational structures, and we then need to work together to take it forward, because it is a real relationship between the troop contributing countries, the United Nations, and also all of the regional entities and support networks that are focused on developing female participation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Major General Jean-Pierre, Force Commander of the UN Peacekeeping in Cyprus, for sharing with us your very precious experiences and practices on the ground, especially on the relationships between the United Nations and the troops contributing countries. Thank you so much, ma'am. So may I now welcome the Ambassador of Russian Federation to Vietnam, His Excellency Mr. Konstantin Vasilievich Vnukov, a seasoned diplomat with a long and distinguished career in Asia. He has spent more than 5 years in Vietnam. I am 6 years, yes. So I am very, very pleased to have you in our panel tonight. Ambassadors, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nga. Ladies and gentlemen, Let me announce a special address of my Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank the government of Vietnam for organizing this international conference on strengthening women's role in sustaining peace. This event is especially important and relevant as this year marks the 20th anniversary since the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which established the subject of women, peace and security as part of the Council's agenda. Over the recent years, the world community has developed and significantly improved its approaches towards women's participation in the prevention and settlement of the armed conflicts, including mediation and peace-building efforts. Attention has also been focused on affording protection of women in a situation of armed confrontation. The world community has managed to create an extensive legislative framework, build up international cooperation, and gain public support. The results are encouraging. We see representatives of the gentle sex performing excellent serving as negotiators, peacekeepers, and police officers. As reported by UN Secretary General, over the last 5 years alone, the proportion of women in UN missions has increased from 3 to 5.4%, and UN police from 10 to 15, more than 15%. Russia has made a considerable contribution to maintaining this positive dynamic. The proportion of women among police forces that our country deploys for peacekeeping operation over recent years is over 20%. Moreover, the All-Russian Peacekeeping Training Center of Internal Ministry of Russia in Domodedovo. Domodedovo is a small town near Moscow, organizing annual training for foreign law enforcement officers with wide participation of women. In practice, women's participation in peace processes allows to build stronger trust relations with local communities, prevent and investigate cases of violence against civilians, ensuring more efficient reintegration of crime victims. Moreover, today, amid the coronavirus pandemic, women working in medical and humanitarian services play a particularly important role. Their active engagement, commitment, and everyday hard work deserved our highest appreciation. Such perspective received wide support at the UN Security Council meeting on women, peace, and security held by Russia during its presidency on October the 30th this year. We thank our Vietnamese friends and other members of the Council who supported our draft milestone resolution at the end of the meeting. It's very unfortunate that this document was not adopted, as a number of countries seeks to establish monopoly on advancing women's agenda and impose their own approaches to address it. Today, we can see that this course of action has no chance to succeed. To make a meaningful contribution to strengthening women's role in peace processes, the international community needs to work together, enhancing coordination within the Security Council, ensuring effective work of the United Nations Secretariat, and promoting a clear division of labor between the bodies of UN system. Thank you very much. Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Vnukov, for conveying the message of His Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov. And please also have us to convey our appreciations and thanks to His Excellency Minister Lavrov. Thank you very much. So we now turn to our fourth speaker, who is from the African nations of Ghana, Lieutenant Colonel Faustina Dennison, Deputy Head of Training, Evaluation and Development of Kofi Annan International Training Center. So are you ready? Yes. So thank you so much, Madam, for joining us. Yes, the floor is yours, please.
Yes, and thank you very much for having me. It is a very august occasion, and I am honored to be part of this discussion. Women participation in peacekeeping cannot be overemphasized. To increase the meaningful participation of women in peacekeeping, there is a need for government of troop-contributing countries to increase and sustain the numbers of females where applicable in their respective armed forces. It is on this basis that we can even get the numbers to join the UN peacekeeping. If the governments are not able to increase the numbers in their countries to marshal the women for peacekeeping, is not something we can do easily. Again, troop-contributing countries can also provide financial and logistic support for mentoring program for women, so that all women can have the needed skill to be able to participate in peacekeeping mission. When we take our example from the all-women formed police unit by the Indian government, you realize that the women have been encouraged massively to join peacekeeping, which I think that if other troop-contributing countries emulate, it will send us far in wherever we want to go. Again, women need to be educated and their mind disabused from the fact that the uniform is the preserve of men. They should get to understand that they have the can-do spirit in them and that they can do it. They don't need too much to be able to go to the forefront and do what the men are doing. Regional organizations can also, with TCCs, formulate policies that is intentional of including women in participating in peacekeeping operations. Some of the strategies an initiative I think can be adopted and has been also tried in Ghana Armed Forces is making women the deputies for these commanding officers. I had the opportunity of being the second in command of a battalion, and it served as a means of learning from the commander, and it helped me so much. Now, if you give me a battalion, I believe that I can handle. So if we have this strategy of letting the woman be a deputy of the commanders, they will learn quickly. Sometimes books does not really give you everything, but hands-on and being a deputy, I believe that they can go far. Again, women must be given challenging roles. Women must believe in themselves. They are to be encouraged and given challenging roles so that they will see what they can do, because they have a lot to bring on the table. I believe that if challenging roles are given to the women, they will go far. Again, just to make it simple, the buddy system, women, it is good to have all women conference, all women everything, but always they should try and put men in their midst and learn from the men, because the men have been in the business for a very long time, and we definitely need to learn from the men. When we say that women can do, but if they are not taught and they do not take their mentorship from the men, they get it wrong in the end. We need the men. In women conference, let's have 1 or 2 women in the conference. In women capacity building, let's have men and some few men in the conference so that they learn the tricks. The men know the tricks. They have been in the business for a long time, and we are now coming in. So we need to get on board with the men. Again, I also want to, we have, women have the capability of significantly improving some areas, not only in logistics, but even in command. So in Ghana, for instance, during our time, I entered the armed forces some 15 years ago. Women were not posted into combat roles, but only logistics roles. However, now we have come to know that if we continue like this, women cannot be projected to the level that they need to be projected. So currently, the strategy being used by Ghana Armed Forces is to open up and make women also enter the combat roles, so that they will have the needed confidence to go up the ladder. Again, after commissioning from the armed forces, for example, in Ghana, women were not allowed to do any type of training which is combat related. Their men were left, the men were left to climb the ladder, taught how to climb the ladder, taught how to command, but women were not in those training. However, now as I'm speaking, there is an initiative to let the young ones, the young lieutenants who have now entered the system, to also join this kind of training and upgrade themselves. So far it is good, but there's more room for improvement. Ghana is doing its best, sending so much women to peacekeeping operation in Congo, in Somalia. They have also been to Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone. Ghana has been in that peacekeeping business for a long time, but it is now that women are being pushed to join the force, which I believe that they can. We have women we can also celebrate for the achievement in peacekeeping. For instance, as at now, we have a deputy force commander in Minoso from Ghana, Brigadier General Constance Mmefa Ejani. It is good for us. We also have who was the first Brigadier General woman from Ghana, which is a role model to all the women in Ghana as at now. After her, we have also had a second female brigadier, so we have only 2 female brigadier generals, which I believe that, looking at the example and looking at what they have done so far, I think that command in Ghana, the government will be open to increasing or promoting women, and women too have the confidence to also attain certain heights that they are supposed to attain. We also have Brigadier General Chumberema, we also celebrate her. She's now the defense attaché in Cote d'Ivoire. She is a strong woman. She was one of the first women who were, she was appointed as the Director of Education, and she did marvelously well. I believe that it is her work as a Director training in Ghana Armed Forces that propelled her to become the Brigadier General and also become the Defense Attaché to Côte d'Ivoire. There are other women who have started the race a very long time ago, like Warrant Officer Helen Owusu, who was the only female driver during the Rwanda genocide. She has been awarded severally for her work there. Women are capable of doing the work that they are supposed to. They just need to be encouraged, they don't need to be boldened, they just need to be told that you can do it. And I believe they can take it up. We need the support of the government, we need the support of UN, we need the support of the regional organizations to make it intentional to put women at the forefront. Not only, as the Major General said already, not only at the topmost, but also in the middle level and even at the down there. Thank you very much for your audience.
Thank you so much, Ms. Faustina Denison, for sharing with us Ghana perspectives, touching upon the role of regional organizations in recruiting women to participate in peacekeeping operations and the importance of women capacity building. So thank you so much, Madam. Our fifth speaker of the night is an official from the UN system, Ms. Asako Okai, Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Crisis Bureau UNDP Program, New York. In this role, she leads UNDP's corporate crisis-related work and drives UNDP's vision and priorities for crisis prevention, response, and recovery. Ms. Okai has an extensive track record in development, humanitarian response, disaster management, and peace-building work at both strategic and operational levels. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for kind introduction. Excellencies, Head of Agencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to extend my sincere gratitude to the government of Vietnam for its commitment to the women, peace and security agenda and hosting this much needed discussion to celebrate the landmark 20th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325. In this particular session on the future on women in peacekeeping, I want to begin by congratulating Vietnam for already reaching the 2028 target set by the Security Council to double the number of female uniformed security personnel in the field operations. While this is really a commendable development, let me provide perspectives from the lead development agency on what can be done to complement the effort to increase the number of female peacekeepers. Women are key to achieving sustainable peace and development solutions. Whether peace building, peacekeeping, or conflict and crisis response, the international community must invest more in the meaningful inclusion of women at all stages, from participation to prevention, protection to resolution and recovery. Evidence shows that women's involvement in peace negotiations contribute to the quality and durability of peace agreements, as well as a higher number of provisions aimed at political reform and higher implementation rates. We all know this in theory, but what is hindering us from translating our commitment to actual results? In this regard, let me offer you the top recommendation that emerged from the recent International Symposium on Women and Peacekeeping, co-organized by Vietnam's Ministry of Defense and UNDP on 26th of November this year. The symposium highlighted the need to invest in gender-responsive analysis to uncover the norms and stereotypes that block women's full engagement in peacebuilding and peacekeeping. It also pointed out the importance of promoting an enabling domestic policy environment through dedicated national action plans on women, peace, and security, which should consider policy options such as maternity and paternity leave and childcare support for ensuring women are not penalized for care responsibilities. Subsequently, the symposium recommended the creation of gender-strong units in the field, as well as of innovative training for security forces, both police and military, to address key capacity gaps. We need to identify promising female police officers and soldiers to participate in high-level officer training to increase the supply of higher-ranking female officers for peacekeeping operation deployments. When decision makers are women, they can better drive gender-responsive efforts. In the context of COVID-19, let me congratulate Vietnam for proposing the newly approved UN General Assembly resolution for the establishing December 27 as the International Day of Pandemic Prevention. The pandemic issues were also addressed in the symposium that I mentioned, and the women peacekeepers stressed the need to strengthen training for undertaking peacekeeping missions safely in the context of COVID, providing sufficient PPE for missions on the ground, and guide the peacekeepers as educators and role models for local communities on preventive behaviors. Distinguished participants, let me emphasize that the integrated missions and missions in transition are prime opportunities to work across the humanitarian development and peace nexus and foster gender-responsive peace-building efforts beyond the life cycle of the UN missions. It is critical that our work across the nexus is fully integrated from the very beginning of the peacekeeping operations in order to ensure that gender is seen as a whole of a society issue and not simply a security concern addressed by uniformed services. The UN country team must work hand in hand with peacekeeping as sustainable peace and development are mutually reinforcing. Increasing the number of female peacekeepers need to be complemented by an integrated approach across various sectors across the government and society. That is why UNDP engaged with peacekeeping missions to advance gender equality across rule of law, access to justice, security sector reform, human rights, and democratic governance. For example, earlier this year in South Sudan, together with the missions UNMISS, OHCHR, and UN team of experts on rule of law and sexual violence in conflict, we established the first joint program to focus on the issue of conflict-related sexual violence, a terrible and profound violation of women's human rights. In October, the first workshop, including senior military commanders and military, prepared the groundwork to integrate the conflict-related sexual violence action plan into the military training curriculum. And I am also pleased to note that UNDP, the Department of Peacekeeping Operation, and UN Women are working together under a gender justice partnership to create a women-only roster of judicial and corrections officers in 2021, including government-provided personnel and a training module to promote gender parity in peace operations. In our approach to sustaining peace, national ownership is key to the success of these initiatives. UNDP supports strengthening of national institutions, national policy development, and planning and budgeting exercise. At the level of political decision-making, our global parliamentary handbook on women, peace, and security identifies ways in which parliaments can review national peacekeeping efforts in line with the National Action Plan, secure resources for gender training of security forces and peacekeepers, and criminalize sexual exploitation by peacekeepers. We wholeheartedly welcome the recent adoption by the Vietnam's National Assembly a resolution on the country's engagement in UN peacekeeping operation with strong gender dimensions. We hope that others will follow suit. In Somalia, for example, UNDP, working with their partners and missions and development partners, supported the Ministry of Women and Human Rights Development to draft a first Somali Women's Charter. The Charter stands as a gender framework for the new National Development Plan, a remarkable feat in this context. UNDP takes a whole of society approach to empowering women peace builders, peacekeepers, mediators, and women as agents of change. We foster partnerships with wide cross-section of women activists across ethnic groups, youth, elderly, religious, political affiliations, in order to adequately represent the diversity of women's lived experience and for addressing violent extremism and promoting peace and security. Distinguished participants, to build a just, inclusive, and peaceful society where gender equality is mainstreamed requires a coordinated and joined-up cooperation. UNDP stands ready to support the government of Vietnam in its ambition to become a regional hub on women in peacekeeping that facilitate research and training to foster a community of women peacekeepers to share lessons learned. I close my remark by urging us all to build forward better, which we can only do by accelerating the women, peace, and security agenda. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Asako Okai, for your insightful remarks, which points out the importance of coordinations of UN agencies in peacekeeping and peace building, and the importance of women participation in all stages of peace processes. And also thank you for UNDP's strong support for winning Vietnam a regional hub for peacekeeping. So thank you. And now it's my great honor to introduce Major General Christine Lund, the first ever female force commander of the United Nations Peacekeeping and a retired Major General in Norwegian Army. Major General Lund has 40 years of experience of national and international operations. She was deployed for 13 years abroad with UN, NATO, and coalition forces. The floor is yours, Major General Lund.
Distinguished guests, thank you very much for inviting me to this important conference. I will share some of my experiences. I have had the honor of serving as force commander and head of mission of 2 different UN operations. My experience is that there are many ways of increasing women's representation in the military and in the international organizations. When I was force commander at Cyprus, we set women and gender on top of the agenda. At that time, it was 4% female military. We increased that to 8%. For the UN police, it was 10%, and we increased that to 25%, just by putting it on the agenda, on the top. Having a direct contact with the troop contributing countries was important. I had the opportunity to see and inspect pre-deployment training. This gave me a good opportunity to speak to the different troop contributing countries' defense and political staff, underlining the importance of gender in their contribution. During my time in Afghanistan, certain countries could not, for example, do house search because they did not have female soldiers. This experience also got to our own special forces in Norway, in Afghanistan, and they realized they could not fulfill their mission without women. So this was brought back to our chief of defense, and a woman special forces unit was established. In other words, it's a must to be that women is important to do your mission, must be anchored at the top node at home. And like it is in UN, the Secretary General has been at the forefront for parity within UN. That was of great importance as a female leader in the UN system to have this backing. When UN make a memorandum of understanding with troop contributing countries, gender must be in that memorandum. Having women in units that contribute must be classified as a capability. The capability to, that needs you to reach out to the whole society. Mapping of female networks is important areas that will help you in the mission to interact with different segments of the society. You will get a much more holistic view of the situation. And this can also then lead to a more exclusive transition. Appoint more female military leaders. They will often be role models for both men and women. When I served at Cyprus and the Middle East, I was a member of the Nordic Women Mediators Network. They were invited to exchange experience with women groups and networks at Cyprus and in the Middle East. It's important that the military and the civilian women work well together. Networks are a good tool for this. Now I work at the Peace Research Institute Oslo, and I see the importance of research to support and convince states that having women in the military and civilian leadership is important to sustain the peace. And further, it's all about politics. If the leaders want, they can increase the number of female military personnel. But still, many nations or countries need to be convinced. And finally, I must say that this is not a woman's task. It's a task that we have to do together with our male colleagues. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Major General Christine Lund, for sharing with us your beautiful experiences and also pointed out the role of women and the capabilities of women, especially in interacting with different sectors in society, and also the requirements for the leadership's roles in increasing the numbers of women participating in peace building and peacekeeping processes. So thank you very much, Major General. Now I am very delighted to welcome a representative from Vietnam, First Lieutenant Sami Ngọc, female peacekeeper in the United Nations missions in South Sudan. Vietnam has recently deployed peacekeeper to Africa, and we are very proud to see a significant number of women in our troops. In Vietnam, the public follows their stories with great interest and deeply moved by the beautiful images of our female uniformed personnel performing their peacebuilding duties in places far away from home, truly representing the best of Vietnamese armed forces. First Lieutenant Ngọc works for the Field Support Division, Vietnam Department of Peacekeeping Operations since 2015. She's the first female officer of Vietnam DPKO to deploy with the contingents to UN mission. As you can see, First Lieutenant Ngọc is very young and recently has become a celebrity figure in and is admired by many, Vietnamese people for her unusual yet very interesting and inspiring career in peacekeeping. The floor is yours, Ngọc.
Your Excellencies, distinguished panelists, guests, ladies and gentlemen, Thank you for having me here, and it's such a great honor to be a panelist for these important sessions. So back in 2014, when Vietnam Department of Peacekeeping Operations was established, so the concept of peacekeeping operation was still something new and unfamiliar among the majority of Vietnamese people. And up to now, things have changed a lot. With a total of 176 peacekeepers, Vietnam has sent to UN peacekeeping missions in South Sudan and in Central African Republic, with a high ratios of female peacekeeper participation, which is around 16% for the contingent and 19% for the staff officers and military observers. The term peacekeeping and the images of Vietnamese peacekeeper have now become popular in Vietnam, and people appreciate the effort of women in participation in UN PKOs. And I feel lucky in a way that I receive full support from my parents, my in-laws, and most important, my husband. They do not presume or impose any limitations on my career development. And at work, my chain of command do not differentiate male and female officers, and equal chances are given to everyone based on the performance. For instance, I was the admin officers of Vietnam Level 2 Hospital in Ben Thieu, UNMISS, and I also appointed to work in the board of command of my unit. So I think that the support for gender equalities of my family and my professional environment have made me who I am today, and so do my female colleagues. And in my opinion, to empower women and to help them to develop and thrive for their career and life, it's necessary to break all the barriers, gender prejudices to be exact, and need to heighten the public awareness on gender equalities at all levels. And in UN peacekeeping, women peacekeepers are important in terms of gender perspective, and they play a vital role in building trust with the local communities. And some of us can even become the major mentors and role models for women and girls in those areas. Among many inspiring stories from female peacekeepers, I would like to share with you two stories of Lieutenant Kononga and Lieutenant Kunolian, the first two female peacekeepers that Vietnam sent to the UN mission in South Sudan and Central African Republic. They not only fulfill their roles as staff officers, but willing to walk the extra mile with many extra duty activities. For instance, during their free time, they will visit the local areas, teach the kids the personal hygiene, or share experience with the local mothers on child care, and even teach the locals on the vegetable cultivation techniques. And especially Lieutenant Kunolian, in response to COVID-19 pandemic, she took initiative to rent a sewing machine and made hundreds of face masks and gave them for free to her Minusca College and the locals in Bangui, Central African Republic. And there are other examples, like the Bangladesh peacekeeper who gave away textbook to girls' school in South Sudan, South African medics or Togolese peacekeeper who engage with the local communities and give medical care, a Cameroonian police officers to conduct a session on GBV, gender-based violence, to a local school in Central African Republic, and Olga, a Russian police officers, funded eye surgery for a 4-year-old local girl in South Sudan. And there are just a few examples, but there are actions that go far beyond the code of duties to support the local communities, have shown their dedications to the better cause of the missions and also the sustainable future development for the communities where they serve. And they also inspire other female peacekeepers to step out of the comfort zone and to do a better job, and to show their dedication to peace and security. And in my opinion, the contribution of women to peacekeeping are not measured by just the participating number, but also by their exceptional works. that show their dedication to peace and security. And those mentioned role models are just, they are like they become the role model for other female peacekeepers and also exemplify the future female peacekeeper and be the spearhead on the way of attracting more females to join the peacekeeping force. As I remember when I was in South Sudan, during one of the civil military coordination activities, of little local girls approached me, pointed at my blue berets and said that I want to do the same thing as you. So I think that even though the number of female peacekeepers is increasing and we have a lot of female in the leadership, but the virtual and the invisible obstacles still there to challenge us. So I think each and every one of us here today can do our part by setting examples, best practices, and so to lead by example, to create more role models, and to continue to inspire the women and girls all over the world to know that our future is on our hand, and together we stand. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Samingok, for sharing with us very inspiring stories of female peacekeepers working extra miles to support and to help the peoples in local communities. And I'm very much, impressed by what you say, that the meaningful participations of women in peacekeeping cannot be measured by just only the figures, but the exceptional works, but the examples of how the female peacekeepers can do. Yes, thank you so much. Yeah. Now I have the honor to introduce the last, but not the least, representative from academia in our panel tonight, Professor Robert Ignell, Vice Chancellor of the Swedish Defense University and former Senior Fellow at Georgetown University Institute of Women, Peace and Security. His research at the Swedish Defense University focuses on state building and security sector reform, gender in military operations, women in combat, peace support operation, and civil-military relations, as well as the connection between the security and development. Professor Robert Ignell, you have the floor, sir. Please.
Excited to take part in this important event, and let me commend all the previous speakers who have done an absolutely wonderful job, and everyone in the audience who are struggling on, even though it's getting very late in Vietnam. I thought I would base these remarks on a few findings from a book that I wrote with a number of colleagues on women and gender perspectives in military organizations. We noticed that there's a number of countries who have come quite far, and some who have struggled. So we wanted to make a comparison. How have countries implemented Resolution 1325 and gender perspectives in operations, but also how have they integrated women throughout the years? Two rather different processes. And we looked at 8 different countries as well as the United Nations and NATO to give us some clues and perhaps draw out some interesting conclusions from these comparisons. What we found, though, and perhaps one of the most important findings, was that there's incredible historical contingency in each and every case. The historical, very specific process in every country, it just looks different, and it is based on the culture and the history of that country. But despite that, we did find a number of interesting things that stood out. The first one, we were wondering, what is the most important integrating gender in the gender perspectives and gender sensitive ways of operating and providing an inclusive organization. Is that the key point, or is it to add as many women as possible? And interestingly, we could not quite find a correlation between the two. So adding women does not change the culture of the organization yet, at least. Maybe it takes more time. Maybe we need to reach a threshold with more women in the armed forces before we see that. But at the moment, we're not seeing dramatic changes in those armed forces that have done a good job of recruiting women. There are also countries who have done a great job of integrating a gender perspective in operations and worked a lot of becoming more inclusive and open to, within the organization. Now that has, interestingly enough, not led to enormous rises in the recruitment of women. So we cannot take for granted that one thing leads to the other. On the other hand, we have to work on both things at the same time, because what we're hearing from a lot of women who leave the armed forces is there is something about the culture, the number of glass ceilings they have to smash through, the inclusivity, the failure to ask feminist questions, I think is what Cynthia Ignell would describe it as. It's just not a very welcoming environment, and it has to be in order for women to not only accept it, but also to thrive and to reach their top potential within the armed forces and to become peacekeepers, obviously. But I would also like to highlight a few, not of the why questions, but rather the how questions. If we think this is a really important issue, how do we go about getting armed forces to work on these issues? Well, what I found working with a lot of armed forces is that unfortunately, the rights-based arguments, the equal opportunity argument is not enough when you speak to military organizations. The counter-argument is quite often, well, yes, gender equality is really important, and I commend you for working on it, but you have to understand we're in the business of war, and those politically correct issues have no place within our organization. We defend your right to be gender equal, but don't look at us for those types of values. So you have to work on more instrumental approaches and to do what many of the previous speakers have done so well so far, explain why this is good for military organizations. And I even say not just how this improves peacekeeping, but you really have to focus on the core task of the organization. And many armed forces do not consider peacekeeping as their core task. It's defending the nation, fighting and winning the nation's wars, or however they define it. And so you have to be able to convince these organizations within that sort of narrow box of their core task that this improves your ability to do your job even better. And when you can do that, they'll give you an ear at least, and you can start working on these issues. So how do you go about them? Is this, for example, a change from the inside the organization, or do you change armed forces from the outside? And this is not least a question for many advocacy groups. Can we work with military organizations, or should we work against them, against their will? And my strong conviction is that armed forces are very large, complex bureaucracies. There is just no chance of making them change from the outside. You have to get in there. You have to work with them to change the culture and the organization from within. So that would be my starting point. Another question is, do you change it from the top down or from the bottom up? Well, it would be wonderful if the chief of the defense staff or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, or they have many different titles in Sweden, he's called the Supreme Commander. If he would simply give an order to say, well, from now on we'll recruit equally and we'll have an inclusive organization. It doesn't work that way. There are all kinds of ways for bureaucracies to shirk orders from above, even in very hierarchical organizations like the military. So you also need to get at the bottom, the grassroots, and to make use of a generation that is perhaps more open from the start, but that is also really at risk of being socialized into the older traditions of their older peers. So if you can get to them early, give them a strong role, they can, together with a strong leadership, create the necessary double grip that we like to speak about when it comes to organizational change. And that is how you get to the really problematic level, the middle managers in the middle of the organization. So work with both the grassroots and the top level management. Another really interesting question is this about gender mainstreaming or is it about getting specific functions in place? And I think we all agree when we say that for this to be successful, you have to mainstream the entire organization. At the same time, when you're working with a reluctant culture and a really large bureaucracy, you have to be careful so that you don't bite off more than you can chew. Under mainstreaming these documents, do you need to do that? How many controllers do you need to follow it up? How many people in the organizations will make sure that it's implemented in just not just part of the documental structure? And that's why I think, start small. Make sure that you have at least one function in place and let it grow from there and build from inside. It's almost like counterinsurgency strategy, the oil spot strategy. You have to win a small part of the terrain and then let that grow and then let these pieces grow together. And my final point would be the organizational home for these types of processes. When we want to improve the recruitment and women's roles in organizations and also gender perspectives, where do you place the responsibility for these types of change processes? And unfortunately, it tends to end up in HR functions. And I would say you have to get to the very heart of the organization, and that is not HR in the military. If you want to create change in the military, you have to get at the chain of command and what is considered the most prestigious part of that chain of command, which is usually, I'd say, operations, or or where the most money is. And I think looking at the Swedish case, it's when these functions moved from HR to become advisors to the head of operations, that's when things started moving, because suddenly really strong orders from the most prestigious part of the chain of command could be placed to the organization. And that moved things much quicker. Those were a few of the how questions that we have looked at. Again, I think the previous remarks have been truly remarkable and really inspiring. Thanks especially to our female service members from different countries who provide their stories. Thank you so much again for letting me participate. And back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Robert Ignell, for sharing with us your scientific approach on the implementations. And also, we very much, appreciate your how questions. Yes, which gives us a lot of food for thoughts. So thank you very much. I think that we are now moving very close to the end of our session. And with the little time left, I think that we are almost there, right? It's now 22:30. So if there is any questions on the floor, I am ready to open the floor for comments and questions, if there is any. Yeah? So, may I confirm that there is no questions or comments from the floor after a very, very enriching discussion? So if there is the case, yes, I don't see any requests for the floor, right? And also from the internet, from the video conference, I don't see any questions or any requests for the floor, right? No more comments. So let me just very briefly, wrap up our session. So thank you very much, first of all, for your contribution tonight. It was my great honor to be moderating a panel of such excellent speakers. I would like to extend my appreciation to all keynote speakers and panelists who joined this session from all around the world. We have certainly had a very rich discussion from very diverse perspectives on a very important topic. And we heard from policymakers, both from the UN headquarters and government authorities, from actual female peacekeepers and force commanders to academic lecturers on this field. Some of the key messages I think that we can take away from this very enriching discussion. First, we agree on the important and significant contribution that women can make to peace building and peacemaking. Second, there has been progress, but a lot more can be done to enhance women participation in peacekeeping operations. Third, there must be strong political commitment at all levels across the spectrum, both from national governments and at the UN headquarters, which in turn translates into commitment into activities and initiatives. And fourth, the role of awareness raising, advocacy and education, capacity building. Fifth, female officers serving on the ground in PKOs set the best examples and role models for fellow peacekeepers. And sixth, I think that we need a strong support for women peacekeepers, both from the family as well as from society. So the dedications, the contributions of female peacekeepers must be appreciated, need to be honored, and also, needs to be recognized and inspired, because they inspire not only peacekeepers, but only the whole societies. So with that, I would like to close our plenary session, and thank you very much, and wish you all the best, and have a very good night. So thank you very much.
Xin trân trọng cảm ơn bà Nguyễn Phương Nga. Thank you, Excellency. Thưa quý vị đại biểu, phiên họp toàn thể thứ 3 đến đây kết thúc. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn các vị diễn giả khách mời và quý vị đại biểu đã dành thời gian tham dự phiên họp. Phiên họp toàn thể thứ 4 sẽ diễn ra lúc 17 giờ chiều ngày mai. Một lần nữa, ban tổ chức xin trân trọng cảm ơn toàn thể quý vị và hẹn gặp lại quý vị vào ngày mai.